The G-Unit era created some of the biggest moments in 2000s hip-hop, but behind the platinum records, sold-out shows, and legendary street anthems was a story about loyalty, brotherhood, and the people who stood beside 50 Cent before the fame exploded. Now, conversations about Tony Yayo and his relationship with 50 Cent are bringing fans back to the moments that built one of rap's most powerful movements. For years, supporters have watched the bond between 50 Cent and Tony Yayo become one of the most discussed friendships in hip-hop. From the early days before superstardom to the rise of G-Unit, their journey represented trust, ambition, and the challenges that come with success. But when old stories resurface, fans start asking new questions. What really kept G-Unit together during its biggest moments? What struggles happened behind the scenes? And how did the pressure of fame affect the people closest to 50 Cent? Because this story is not only about music. It is about loyalty, sacrifice, and the complicated reality of building an empire in the spotlight. Before the fame, the millions of dollars, and the worldwide recognition, 50 Cent and Tony Yayo were connected through the streets of Queens, New York. Long before G-Unit became a household name, they were part of the same circle, chasing the same dream and trying to escape the limitations around them. Their relationship was built before cameras, interviews, and record deals ever entered the picture. 50 Cent's journey to becoming a global superstar was filled with challenges. After facing setbacks early in his career, he continued pushing forward and eventually created a movement that changed the direction of mainstream hip-hop. Tony Yayo became one of the original members of G-Unit and represented the loyalty and chemistry that helped define the group. His connection with 50 Cent was not created by a record label. It came from years of knowing each other before success arrived. When G-Unit started gaining attention, the group quickly became one of the most talked-about crews in rap. 50 Cent, Tony Yayo, Lloyd Banks, and later Young Buck helped create a sound and image that dominated the early 2000s. The success of G-Unit was about more than music. It represented friendship, teamwork, and the idea that artists could build an empire with people they trusted from the beginning. However, success also brought pressure. When a group becomes one of the biggest names in entertainment, every decision receives attention. Relationships that once existed privately become part of public conversations. Tony Yayo's story became connected to the larger G-Unit journey. Fans watched his rise, his challenges, and his role within a movement that helped define an era of hip-hop. 50 Cent also became known for his business mindset and ability to create opportunities beyond music. As his empire expanded, the dynamics around him naturally changed. This created a common situation many successful artists experience. The people who were there during the struggle may have to adjust when fame changes the environment around them. The history between 50 Cent and Tony Yayo continues to interest fans because it represents one of hip-hop's biggest themes: loyalty before success and the challenges that come after achieving the dream. Their story shows that behind every famous movement are real friendships, real sacrifices, and real moments that shape the legacy people remember. As G-Unit became one of the biggest names in hip-hop, the pressure surrounding the group increased. Success brought money, fame, and opportunities, but it also created new challenges that every member had to navigate. Behind the hit records and sold-out performances were questions about loyalty, individual careers, and how each person fit into the bigger picture. The first major shift came when fans started noticing that the members of G-Unit were developing different paths. While the group remained connected through music and history, each artist faced personal decisions about their own future. 50 Cent's career expanded rapidly. After the success of his debut album and the rise of G-Unit, he became involved in business, television, and other entertainment ventures. His focus moved beyond being only a rapper. Tony Yayo's journey took a different direction. His career was shaped by both his role in G-Unit and the challenges that affected his path during important moments of the group's rise. This created a situation where fans began analyzing every interview, performance, and public appearance. People wanted to understand how relationships changed when the group moved from underground beginnings to international fame. The biggest conversation was always about loyalty. In hip-hop, friendships formed before success often become part of an artist's identity. Fans respect the people who were present during the struggle, which is why changes within groups received so much attention. As years passed, interviews from different members created new discussions. Stories about the early days of G-Unit, the recording process, and the challenges of fame gave fans a closer look at what happened behind the scenes. However, public conversations about friendships in entertainment can become complicated. Artists may remember the same events differently, and outside observers often only see a small part of the full story. The first major twist in the G-Unit story is understanding that success itself can create challenges. When everyone around a person becomes famous, expectations change and decisions become more complicated. 50 Cent's leadership style became one of the most discussed topics among fans. Some viewed him as someone who pushed his team forward, while others debated how his strong personality affected relationships around him. Tony Yayo's connection with 50 Cent remained one of the most talked about parts of the group's history because it represented the original bond that existed before fame. The deeper story was not simply about disagreements or headlines. It was about how people handled change after achieving something they once dreamed about. G-Unit's impact on hip-hop cannot be denied. The group influenced fashion, music, and the way crews were presented in the mainstream industry. But behind every successful movement are moments that test relationships. Pressure, competition, and personal goals can all change the way people interact. As fans look back at the journey, they began asking bigger questions. What happens when the people who build an empire together start facing different challenges? And that question became one of the most interesting parts of the G-Unit legacy. As the years moved forward, the conversation around 50 Cent and Tony Yayo became less about one specific moment and more about understanding how relationships change after massive success. Fans started looking deeper into the history of G-Unit and the challenges that came with maintaining a powerful movement for so many years. The second major development was the realization that every member of G-Unit had a different journey after the group reached its peak. Some focused on solo careers, some explored new opportunities, and others adjusted to a changing music industry. Hip-hop in the 2000s was built around crews and movements. Groups like G-Unit represented more than a collection of artists. They represented a culture, a style, and a connection with fans who followed every move. But the music industry changes quickly. Trends shift, audiences move toward new sounds, and artists have to make decisions about their future. Maintaining the same energy from one era to another becomes one of the biggest challenges. For 50 Cent, expansion became a major part of his story. He moved into television, business ventures, and entertainment projects that showed his ability to think beyond music. For Tony Yayo, his identity remained closely connected to the original G-Unit story. Fans continued remembering his role during the group's most influential years and the chemistry that helped make the movement successful. This created emotional discussions among fans because many people connect loyalty with the people who were present before the fame. They often look at long-term friendships as a symbol of authenticity. However, the reality of entertainment is complicated. People can respect each other while still following different paths. Success does not always mean everyone's journey will look the same. The internet also changed how fans view celebrity relationships. Old interviews, clips, and performances can return years later and create new conversations among younger audiences discovering the story for the first time. The biggest twist is that the legacy of G-Unit is larger than any single disagreement or rumor. The group's influence came from the music, the impact, and the era they helped create. Fans continue debating what made G-Unit special. Some point to the chemistry between members, while others highlight 50 Cent's leadership and ability to create a global brand. The story also shows a larger lesson about friendships in the spotlight. Relationships that survive struggle can still face challenges when money, fame, and new responsibilities enter the picture. As hip-hop continues evolving, the G-Unit story remains an example of how difficult it can be to balance personal connections with professional growth. And that is why conversations about 50 Cent and Tony Yayo continue decades later. The music created history. The public reaction to the story of 50 Cent and Tony Yayo shows how deeply fans connect with hip-hop history. For many listeners, G-Unit was not just a music group. It represented an era, a style, and a feeling that defined an important moment in rap culture. Fans who followed the movement from the beginning often remember the chemistry between the members. They remember the mixtapes, the performances, the fashion, and the confidence that made G-Unit one of the most recognizable crews of its generation. When conversations about the group return, many fans look back with nostalgia. They discuss the impact of songs, the influence on younger artists, and the way G-Unit changed the image of rap groups during that period. At the same time, discussions about friendships in hip-hop often create emotional reactions. Fans become invested because they see artists as real people, not just entertainers. They follow the stories behind the music and become connected to the journeys. Social media has made these conversations even bigger. Old interviews and moments from the past can suddenly become popular again, creating debates between longtime supporters and newer fans discovering the history. Some fans focus on loyalty and believe the people who struggle together should always remain connected. Others understand that personal growth and changing priorities are part of life, especially after achieving major success. The music industry also watches these stories because they reveal the challenges behind building long-term careers. Creating a successful group is difficult, but maintaining relationships after success can be even harder. For 50 Cent, the public has watched him transform from rapper to entrepreneur and entertainment figure. His ability to expand his brand became a major part of his legacy. For Tony Yayo, many fans continue recognizing his contribution to the G-Unit era and the role he played during one of hip-hop's most influential periods. The emotional connection comes from the fact that their story represents something many people experience: relationships changing as life changes. The biggest lesson from the public reaction is that fans remember more than music. They remember the people, the moments, and the stories that made an era special. And even years later, the G-Unit legacy continues creating conversations about friendship, ambition, and the challenges of growing together while following different paths. After looking back at the journey of 50 Cent, Tony Yayo, and G-Unit, the biggest realization is that the story was never only about music. It was about the people behind the movement, the sacrifices made before success, and the challenges that come after achieving the dream. The final twist is that time often changes how people view history. Moments that once created controversy can later become lessons about growth, loyalty, and the reality of building something powerful. G-Unit's legacy continues because the group represented more than individual songs. It represented a period when crews, friendships, and movements had a major influence on hip-hop culture. 50 Cent's evolution showed how an artist could transform into a businessman and create opportunities beyond the recording studio. His journey became an example of reinvention and long-term thinking. Tony Yayo's story remains connected to the foundation of G-Unit and the early years when the group was building its name. Fans continue remembering the role he played during that important era. The unanswered question is how future generations will view the relationships behind legendary movements. Will they focus only on the changes that happened later, or will they remember the foundation that made everything possible? Because every successful empire has a story before the fame. There are friendships, sacrifices, and moments that define the people involved. The G-Unit story shows that even when paths change, the impact created together can remain forever. Fans will continue discussing the music, the memories, and the history behind one of hip-hop's most influential groups. Because sometimes the biggest stories in rap are not just about who won or lost. They are about the journey that created the legacy. The story of 50 Cent and Tony Yayo is one of the most interesting chapters in G-Unit history because it represents more than music. It represents friendship, ambition, loyalty, and the challenges that come with building something legendary while growing in different directions. Now we want to hear from you. What do you think about the G-Unit story? Do you believe the bond between artists from the early days is what makes a movement special? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think G-Unit changed the direction of hip-hop forever? And how do you think fans should remember the legacy of 50 Cent, Tony Yayo, and the entire movement? Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications for more hip-hop stories, music history, and deep dives into the moments that shape the culture. Because every legend has a beginning, every movement has a story, and every era leaves behind a legacy. Stay tuned for the next story.